Sometimes you don't realize how strongly a place is connected to someone until you unexpectedly find yourself standing there again. Your soulmate may have recently passed through a location they had no intention of visiting for emotional reasons. It could have been somewhere completely ordinary, somewhere they had driven past countless times before, but this time something felt different. Perhaps they noticed a familiar building, a particular street, a corner where something once happened between you, or even a simple view that instantly brought your presence back into their mind. For a few seconds, they may have continued moving as if nothing had happened, but internally, their attention had already shifted. Something about that place suddenly felt strangely alive. They may have remembered being there with you, the conversations you shared, the way the two of you felt around each other, or one tiny moment that seemed insignificant back then, but somehow survived all this time. And what may have surprised them most was how quickly their mood changed. One moment they were thinking about their normal responsibilities, and the next they were somewhere completely different emotionally. They may have become quieter without even understanding why. Perhaps they caught themselves looking around, almost expecting to see you or remembering exactly where you once stood. A place can do something that a photograph sometimes cannot. It doesn't just show someone what happened. It can recreate the atmosphere surrounding the memory. The sounds, the surroundings, the distance, even the feeling of standing in the same space can bring back emotions that have been silent for a very long time. Your soulmate may have thought they had already made peace with that chapter. They may have believed enough time had passed for those memories to lose their emotional power. But suddenly, that assumption may have been challenged. And perhaps the strangest part is that they weren't prepared for it at all. They weren't searching for you. They weren't intentionally remembering you. They simply passed through a place that still carried a piece of your shared story. Yet one unexpected detail may have opened a memory they hadn't visited in a long time, and that memory may have changed their entire mood before they even realized what was happening. Because what they are about to understand is that they weren't simply remembering a place from the past. They were remembering what that place meant when you were there. And once that unexpected memory has surfaced, your soulmate may find it surprisingly difficult to simply continue as though nothing happened. The place may still look almost exactly the same, but their experience of it has completely changed. A moment ago, it was just another location they were passing through. Now, every familiar detail seems to carry a connection to you. They may notice something they hadn't paid attention to before, and suddenly they remember exactly why it feels familiar. Perhaps it was the spot where you once had a conversation that stayed with them longer than they admitted. Perhaps it was somewhere you laughed together, waited together, walked together, or simply spent time without realizing that one day the memory would become precious. The strange thing is that the moment itself may not have seemed extraordinary when it happened. You may not have known that it would become one of those memories capable of returning years later with almost the same emotional intensity. But that is often how meaningful memories work. We don't always recognize the important moments while we're living them. Sometimes we only understand their value after enough time has passed for us to see what they really meant. Your soulmate may be experiencing that realization now. As they pass through the place, their mind may begin filling in details they thought were forgotten. They may remember what you were wearing, something you said, the expression on your face, the way you reacted to something unexpected, or even the feeling of being around you during that particular period of their life. One detail may lead to another, and suddenly they aren't simply remembering an event. They are mentally walking through an entire chapter of their past. And perhaps this is why their mood changes so quickly. The location has become more than a location. It has become a doorway. Through that doorway is a version of their life when you were still part of their everyday emotional world. They may remember how natural some things once felt between you. Maybe conversations didn't require effort. Maybe there was a comfort in simply being near each other. Maybe they could talk about things they rarely shared with other people. Or perhaps there were moments when neither of you said much at all, yet the silence didn't feel uncomfortable. Those small details can become surprisingly powerful after distance enters the picture. Your soulmate may suddenly realize that what they miss isn't necessarily one dramatic event. They may miss the collection of ordinary moments that once surrounded the connection. They may miss the way your presence made an ordinary place feel different. They may remember walking beside you and not thinking about how temporary that moment was. They may remember looking forward to seeing you without realizing that someday they would look back and wish they could experience that anticipation again. And perhaps one of the most emotional parts is realizing that they cannot recreate the exact version of that moment. Even if they returned with you today, everything would be different because both of you have changed. Time has moved forward. Life has happened. You have both experienced things the other person may know nothing about. That can create a strange mixture of warmth and sadness. They can appreciate the memory while simultaneously realizing that the moment itself is gone. The place remains, but the people who occupied that moment have changed. And that may be why their thoughts begin turning toward you. They may wonder where you are now, what your life looks like, and whether you ever think about that same place. Perhaps they wonder if you remember the exact moment they are remembering. Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. They have no way of knowing, and that uncertainty can make the memory feel even more personal. They may find themselves imagining what you would say if you knew they were standing there thinking about you. Would you be surprised? Would you laugh about the memory? Would you remember it immediately? Or would you tell them that you had completely forgotten? They may never ask you, but the questions can still occupy their mind. And sometimes the questions we never ask are the ones that reveal the most about what we still feel. Your soulmate may begin to wonder why this particular place still has the ability to affect them. They may tell themselves that it is normal to feel nostalgic when encountering something from the past. But perhaps they know this reaction is different. If it were only about the location, they could acknowledge the memory and keep walking. Instead, they may find themselves emotionally distracted long after they've left. The place may remain behind them, but the memory travels with them. They may continue thinking about you while driving home, working, eating, or trying to focus on something completely unrelated. And that is when the deeper realization may begin to form. Maybe they don't miss the place. Maybe they miss what the place represented. It represented a time when you were present. It represented a version of themselves that existed before the connection became complicated. It represented feelings they may not have fully appreciated when they were experiencing them. And perhaps they are starting to understand that certain places become emotionally powerful because of the people who once stood there with us. A street is just a street until it carries a memory. A cafe is just a cafe until someone's laughter becomes associated with it. A park is just a park until you remember sitting there with someone who changed your life. Your soulmate may be realizing that this place became meaningful because you were part of the story attached to it. And once they understand that, the emotional reaction becomes harder to dismiss. They may remember moments when they felt especially close to you, moments when they thought the connection would continue, moments when they imagined there would always be another opportunity to return to that place together. Perhaps they never expected the memory to become something they would carry alone. Maybe at the time they assumed there would be more conversations, more meetings, more ordinary days, more chances to say what they didn't say. But life doesn't always provide those opportunities. Sometimes people leave a moment thinking there will be another one, only to realize much later that the moment they took for granted was already becoming a memory. That realization can create regret. Your soulmate may begin thinking about what they would do differently if they could return to that particular day. Would they have stayed longer? Would they have listened more carefully? Would they have said something they kept to themselves? Would they have looked at you differently if they had known how important that moment would eventually become? These thoughts don't necessarily mean they want to reverse their entire life. They may simply be recognizing the value of something they didn't fully understand at the time. And perhaps the most unexpected part is that the memory may bring back a feeling they thought they had outgrown. They may feel tenderness. They may feel sadness. They may feel gratitude. They may even feel a quiet longing that they haven't allowed themselves to acknowledge. They may wonder whether you still carry the same memory somewhere inside you. They may wonder whether the place has the same meaning for you. They may wonder if you ever pass by and think about them. These questions can become almost impossible to ignore because the location has reminded them that the connection existed in a real physical place, not just in their imagination. They can almost see the past around them, and for a moment the distance between then and now may feel strangely small. But there is something else happening beneath the nostalgia. They may be realizing that the person they remember isn't simply someone they used to know. You may represent a period of emotional growth in their life. Perhaps being connected to you taught them something about themselves. Perhaps you made them more open, more honest, more vulnerable, or more aware of what they actually wanted from a meaningful connection. Maybe they didn't understand that lesson until much later. Now, standing in that familiar place, they may see how much that chapter shaped them. And this is where the memory begins becoming bigger than the location itself. It is no longer just about what happened there. It is about who they were when it happened and who they became afterward. They may realize that some part of their current self was shaped by the experiences they shared with you. That can be emotional because it means the connection didn't simply disappear when it ended. It became part of their story. They may have moved forward, built a different routine, met different people, and experienced new chapters, but the influence of that connection may still exist quietly inside them. And perhaps that is why one unexpected memory could change their mood so completely. It reminded them that moving forward doesn't mean every meaningful part of the past becomes meaningless. Sometimes you can continue your life while still carrying certain memories with you. You can accept that something ended while still appreciating that it happened. You can stop waiting for someone while still remembering what they meant. Your soulmate may be beginning to understand this now, even if they don't have the words for it yet. They may leave that place thinking they simply experienced an emotional moment, but the memory may continue following them. And as the day goes on, they may start asking themselves a question they didn't expect to ask at all. If one ordinary place can still bring back so much emotion, what does that say about the person they associate with it? Because perhaps the place didn't change their mood by itself. Perhaps it simply reminded them of something they had been trying not to feel. What makes this moment even more significant is what may happen after your soulmate has already left that place. The location is behind them. The road continues. People around them are going about their normal lives, and yet something inside them may no longer feel completely normal. They may have expected the memory to disappear as soon as they moved away, but instead it may follow them. They may suddenly find themselves thinking about you at unexpected moments, replaying the scene in their mind, and wondering why that particular memory had such a strong effect. Perhaps they even try to convince themselves that it was nothing more than coincidence. They may tell themselves that everyone becomes nostalgic when they encounter a familiar place, that the mind naturally remembers old experiences, and that there is no deeper meaning behind their sudden change in mood. But somewhere underneath that logical explanation, they may already know that this felt different. The place didn't simply remind them of an event. It reminded them of you, and with you came a collection of emotions they may have spent a long time keeping under control. They may remember how they felt around you during that period of their life. Maybe they felt more understood than they were used to feeling. Maybe they could be themselves without constantly explaining every part of who they were. Maybe there was a sense of comfort that they didn't recognize as something special until it was gone. And now, standing in that familiar environment again, they may realize that they weren't only missing a person. They were missing a feeling. They were missing the version of themselves that existed when your connection was still alive. That can be a much deeper realization than simply thinking, I remember them. because remembering someone is easy. Understanding why their absence still affects you is much harder. Your soulmate may begin questioning whether they ever truly processed the ending between you. Perhaps they accepted it on the surface. They stopped reaching out. They stopped talking about what happened. They continued with their life. They may have even convinced themselves that they were completely at peace with everything. But peace and emotional indifference are not always the same thing. You can accept that something ended and still recognize that it mattered. You can move forward and still carry gratitude, tenderness, or even unanswered questions about someone from your past. This unexpected encounter may be forcing your soulmate to recognize that distinction. They may suddenly understand that they didn't erase the connection. They simply learned how to live without discussing it. And perhaps that is why the place affected them so strongly. It touched something that had been quiet, rather than something that had completely disappeared. They may start remembering moments they haven't thought about in a long time. Maybe one specific conversation comes back first. Then another memory follows. Perhaps they remember something you said that seemed insignificant at the time, but now sounds completely different in their mind. Maybe they remember how you looked at them during a particular moment. Maybe they remember the way you smiled. Maybe they remember how comfortable the silence felt between you. These small details can become powerful because they are often the things we don't intentionally preserve. They simply remain somewhere in the background of our emotional memory. And when the right place brings them forward, they can feel almost as vivid as they did when they first happened. Your soulmate may even be surprised by how much they still remember. They may wonder how their mind could hold on to details they haven't consciously revisited for so long. But perhaps emotional memories are not stored the same way ordinary facts are. We can forget dates and conversations while remembering exactly how someone's presence made us feel. We can forget what we were talking about, but remember the warmth of being understood. We can forget the details of a particular day while remembering that we didn't want it to end. And perhaps that is what is happening now. The place has activated the emotional part of their memory, not simply the factual part. This can make the experience much more intense. They may begin wondering whether you remember the same moments. Did that place ever mean something to you? Do you remember standing there together? Do you remember the conversation? Do you remember the feeling? Or did life eventually erase those details for you? They cannot know. And because they cannot know, their mind may begin creating possibilities. Maybe you still remember. Maybe you occasionally think about it. Maybe you pass that place and feel the same strange shift they just experienced. Or maybe you moved on so completely that the location means nothing to you anymore. That possibility may create a surprising emotional ache, not because they necessarily expect you to be waiting, but because they suddenly realize how little they know about your life now. Time may have created an entire world between the two of you. They may know the person you were, but they don't know everything about the person you became. And that realization can make an old memory feel even more precious. They may begin wondering how much you have changed, what you have experienced, what makes you happy now, and whether anything from your shared past still holds meaning for you. They may even wonder whether they would recognize you if they met you today. Would the same emotional connection appear? Would you look at them differently? Would the memories feel warm, awkward, painful, or simply peaceful? These questions may never receive immediate answers, but the fact that they are asking them says something important about their emotional state. They are no longer simply remembering what happened. They are imagining what it means now. And this is where nostalgia can slowly become something deeper. Nostalgia looks backward, but longing often looks forward, wondering whether something could ever exist again. Your soulmate may find themselves somewhere between those two emotions. They may not know whether they want the past back, but they may suddenly feel curious about the possibility of a future that includes some form of reconnection. They may think about reaching out, even if only for a simple conversation. They may wonder what they would say if they had the opportunity. Maybe they would start with something casual. Maybe they would mention the place. Maybe they would tell you that they happened to pass by and remembered you. But then they may hesitate, because admitting that the place affected them would mean admitting that you still have enough emotional significance to affect them at all. And that can feel vulnerable. They may not want you to know how quickly their mood changed. They may not want to reveal that one familiar location caused them to think about you for the rest of the day. So they may keep it private. They may continue with their routine while carrying a private emotional conversation inside themselves. And perhaps that private conversation becomes more honest than anything they would ever say aloud. They may admit that they miss certain things. They may admit that they regret certain choices. They may admit that they still wonder about you. They may admit that there are moments when they wish they could return to a simpler version of the connection before circumstances, misunderstandings, fear, or distance complicated everything. But they may also understand that returning to the past is impossible. Even if they could stand in that same place with you again, neither of you would be exactly who you were then. That realization can bring a different kind of sadness. They may not actually want to recreate the old chapter. They may simply wish they could experience the feeling of that chapter one more time. They may wish they could go back for a few minutes, not to change everything, but to appreciate what they didn't understand while they had it. Perhaps they would listen more carefully. Perhaps they would stay a little longer. Perhaps they would notice the details they ignored. Perhaps they would tell you that the moment mattered. And that is where regret can quietly become gratitude. They may realize that although the connection didn't become what they once imagined, it still gave them something valuable. It showed them what certain emotions felt like. It taught them something about vulnerability. It revealed what they wanted from a meaningful connection. It may have helped them grow into a person who understands themselves better today. And perhaps the place is reminding them of all of that at once. It isn't simply a monument to what they lost. It is also evidence of what they experienced. Your soulmate may begin to understand that some people become part of our emotional history without remaining part of our daily lives. Their absence doesn't erase their impact. Sometimes someone can leave your routine while remaining quietly present in the person you became because you knew them. And maybe that is what they are realizing about you. They may have thought that enough distance had made the connection irrelevant. But the moment they passed that place, something inside them recognized the memory immediately. Their emotional response may have arrived before their logical mind could explain it. That alone may make them question what they have been telling themselves. If the connection truly meant nothing anymore, why did their mood change? Why did their thoughts become so focused on you? Why did a simple location suddenly feel emotionally charged? Perhaps because some memories don't need constant attention to remain meaningful. They can sit quietly for years and still have the ability to touch us when we encounter the right trigger. Your soulmate may now be realizing that this particular memory was never gone. It was simply waiting. And perhaps the most important thing they are beginning to understand is that the memory doesn't necessarily mean they are supposed to return to you. It may simply mean they finally have the emotional distance to recognize what the connection meant. They may see the past with less anger, less confusion, and more honesty. They may recognize where they made mistakes. They may recognize what you gave. They may recognize what they received. They may even recognize that both of you were doing the best you could with the emotional awareness you had at the time. And that kind of realization can change a memory from something painful into something meaningful. But there is still one question that may continue following them long after they leave that place. If one unexpected memory can change their entire mood after so much time, then what exactly is still living underneath all the distance? Perhaps the answer is not simply that they miss you. Perhaps they are beginning to realize that a part of their heart still associates certain places, moments, and feelings with you. And once they recognize that, they may no longer be able to dismiss their reaction as random nostalgia. The place may have revealed something they weren't ready to see before. The connection may be in the past, but the emotional meaning of it may still exist inside them. And now, the memory may begin to reveal something your soulmate was not prepared to confront. Until this point, they could still tell themselves that what happened was simply a temporary emotional reaction to a familiar place. They could blame the surroundings, the timing, or the unexpected nature of the memory. But as they continue thinking about you after leaving, that explanation may no longer feel convincing. The place may have disappeared behind them, yet the feeling remains. They may continue replaying the moment in their mind, wondering why something so ordinary had such a powerful effect. Perhaps they even catch themselves thinking about you later that evening, when there is nothing around them that should have triggered the memory again. And that is when they may begin to understand that the location was never the real source of the emotion. It was only the key that unlocked something they had already been carrying. They may realize that what changed their mood wasn't seeing a street, a building, a cafe, or a familiar corner. It was suddenly remembering what it felt like when you were part of their life. That realization can be difficult because it forces them to look beyond the surface of the memory. They may have spent a long time believing that they had moved forward completely, and in many ways, they probably have. They may have built new routines, experienced new relationships, focused on personal goals, and created a life that no longer revolves around what happened between you. But moving forward does not necessarily mean that every emotional connection from the past becomes meaningless. Sometimes we continue growing while still carrying small pieces of people who helped shape us. Your soulmate may now be recognizing that you became one of those pieces. They may remember how different they felt around you compared with how they feel in their life today. Perhaps there was a certain openness they had with you that they don't easily experience anymore. Maybe they felt seen in a way they couldn't explain. Maybe conversations with you made them feel understood without requiring them to constantly defend or explain themselves. Or perhaps there was simply a sense of ease that they didn't appreciate until it was gone. The place may have reminded them of that feeling so suddenly that they couldn't immediately protect themselves from it. They may have been caught off guard by the realization that what they remember most isn't one dramatic event. It is the atmosphere surrounding those ordinary moments. The way time seemed to move differently. The way your presence could make a normal day feel more meaningful. The way something as simple as walking together or sitting somewhere could become a memory worth carrying years later. And perhaps this is where their emotions begin becoming more complicated. They may feel grateful for what they experienced with you, while simultaneously feeling sad that it ended. They may feel happy remembering certain moments, and then experience a quiet ache, because they know they cannot simply step back into them. They may even feel regret about things they did or failed to do. Perhaps there was a conversation they should have handled differently. Perhaps they didn't communicate enough. Perhaps they allowed pride, fear, confusion, or circumstances to create distance when they should have been more honest. And standing in that familiar place may make those decisions look different from the perspective of who they are today. Time has a way of changing how we interpret our own past. When we are inside a situation, we often react according to what we fear, what we believe, and what we understand at that moment. Years later, we may recognize things we couldn't see before. Your soulmate may now be looking at their past connection with a different level of emotional maturity. They may understand why you reacted the way you did. They may understand why certain things hurt you. They may realize that something they once considered unimportant actually carried much more emotional weight. And perhaps that realization is one of the reasons the memory feels so powerful now. They are not simply remembering what happened. They are seeing it through the eyes of the person they have become. That can create a strange feeling of wanting to go back, not necessarily to change the entire story, but simply to approach one moment with the understanding they have today. They may think, if I had known then what I know now, would I have done things differently? That question can stay with someone for a long time. They may wonder whether you would recognize the changes in them. They may wonder whether you have changed just as much. They may imagine crossing paths with you again and wonder what that moment would feel like. Would there be awkwardness? Would there be warmth? Would the memories return immediately? Would both of you simply smile and realize that too much time has passed? Or would there be a deeper conversation about everything that was never fully understood? They may not know, but the fact that they are imagining these possibilities tells them something about where their heart is at this moment. They may not be ready to act on the emotion, but they can no longer deny that the thought of you still has a place inside them. And perhaps they begin wondering whether you ever experience the same thing. Maybe you pass that location one day and remember them. Maybe you see something connected to the past and feel nothing at all. Maybe you have completely transformed the meaning of that place in your own mind. They have no way of knowing, and that uncertainty may actually make the memory more intense, because now they are not only thinking about what happened between you, they are thinking about what that memory means to you today. They may wonder whether they still exist anywhere in your memories. They may wonder if you ever look back and smile at certain moments. They may wonder if you remember the same details they remember. And perhaps the most vulnerable thought of all is whether you ever miss them. They may never admit that question to anyone, but it can quietly sit in the background of their thoughts. This is where the emotional tension becomes strongest, because there is no guaranteed answer. The past belongs to both of you, but the present belongs to each of you separately. They cannot know what exists inside your heart anymore. They can only interpret their own reaction, and their reaction is telling them that something about the connection still matters. Not necessarily because they are destined to reunite, not because the universe is guaranteeing a future, but because meaningful experiences leave emotional traces. Sometimes those traces remain invisible until something unexpectedly brings them back into view. The place did exactly that. It reminded them of a version of themselves that existed when you were nearby. It reminded them of feelings they may have suppressed. It reminded them that some memories become part of us even after the people involved move in completely different directions. And perhaps they begin to see the connection with more compassion now. Instead of asking why it didn't work, they may begin asking what it taught them. Instead of focusing only on what was lost, they may recognize what was gained. Maybe knowing you taught them how to communicate more honestly. Maybe it showed them what emotional closeness actually feels like. Maybe it made them realize what they want from future relationships. Maybe it forced them to grow in areas where they once avoided growth. And if so, then the connection didn't disappear when it ended. It continued through the person they became afterward. That realization can be surprisingly emotional because it changes the meaning of the past. What once looked like a chapter that simply ended may now look like a chapter that helped shape them. They may not want to repeat everything that happened. They may not even know whether a reunion would make sense. But they can still honor what the connection meant. And perhaps this is what their heart is finally allowing them to do. Instead of pushing the memory away, they may let themselves feel it without judgment. They may allow themselves to smile at the beautiful parts. They may acknowledge the painful parts. They may accept the regret without allowing it to consume them. They may even silently thank you for the role you played in their life, even if you never hear those words. But something still remains unresolved. Because once someone realizes that a place can still bring back such a strong emotional reaction, they naturally begin wondering what else might still be buried beneath the surface. What happens if they hear a song connected to you? What happens if they see an old photograph? What happens if they unexpectedly hear your name? What happens if they actually see you again? They may not have answers to any of those questions, but now they may be curious. And curiosity can be powerful because it keeps the emotional door slightly open. They may tell themselves that they should leave everything in the past, yet a quiet part of them may wonder whether the story truly feels finished. Perhaps what they are really searching for isn't a second chance, but clarity. They may want to know whether what they felt was as meaningful as they remember. They may want to know whether you understood the depth of the connection. They may want to know whether you ever carried the same unanswered feelings. And perhaps they will never receive those answers. But the unexpected encounter has already changed something. Before passing that place, they could comfortably believe the memory had lost its power. After passing it, they may realize that the emotional meaning is still there. They may continue their life, but now with a slightly different understanding of their own heart. They may realize that you are not simply someone from their past. You are connected to a chapter that helped shape who they are today. And perhaps that is why their mood changed so suddenly. For a brief moment, the present became quiet enough for the past to speak. And what the past said was something they weren't expecting to hear. You may have moved forward, but you never completely stopped caring. And perhaps this is where the entire experience finally settles into something deeper for your soulmate. After all the memories, questions, and emotions that surfaced, they may eventually understand that the place didn't simply make them remember you. It showed them that certain parts of their past still carry meaning, even if their life has moved far beyond that chapter. They may have continued walking or driving after that unexpected moment, but internally something had shifted. The world around them returned to normal, yet their thoughts remained somewhere else. They may find themselves thinking about the person they were when they knew you, the things they believed at that time, and the emotions they were too inexperienced or afraid to fully understand. Perhaps they had always believed that the passage of time would make everything feel distant enough that one day the memories would simply become neutral. But now they may realize that time doesn't always erase emotional significance. Sometimes it changes the way we understand it. What once felt confusing can eventually become clear. What once felt painful can eventually become tender. What once seemed like a missed opportunity can eventually become a lesson. And perhaps your soulmate is finally reaching that point. They may not be asking themselves whether they can return to the past anymore. Instead, they may be asking what the past was trying to teach them. They may remember the connection with more honesty now, without needing to blame you, blame themselves, or pretend that nothing meaningful happened. They may recognize that both of you were simply two people trying to navigate emotions, circumstances, fears, and expectations with the understanding you had at the time. Maybe neither of you knew how significant certain moments would eventually become. Maybe you both assumed there would be more time, more conversations, more opportunities, more chances to explain what you really felt. But sometimes life doesn't give us the opportunity to fully understand something while we are inside it. Sometimes we only recognize its value after we have walked far enough away to see the whole picture. That place may have given your soulmate exactly that perspective. For a few moments, they were able to see the connection not through the confusion of the past, but through the distance of the present. And perhaps what they saw surprised them. They may realize that they don't remember only the difficult parts. They remember your laugh. They remember your energy. They remember small conversations that nobody else would understand. They remember the way certain ordinary moments felt extraordinary simply because you were there. And perhaps they realize that these memories survived because they mattered. Not necessarily because they are supposed to lead somewhere, but because they became part of who they are. This can create a quiet sense of gratitude. They may feel thankful that they experienced something capable of leaving such a lasting impression. They may even silently appreciate the fact that you once crossed their path, regardless of how the story eventually unfolded. And perhaps that gratitude is what allows the sadness to soften. They may still miss certain aspects of the connection, but they don't have to turn that feeling into desperation. They can simply acknowledge it. They can say internally, "That mattered to me." Sometimes those 4 words are more powerful than any dramatic confession, because acknowledging that something mattered doesn't require changing the present. It simply means being honest about the past. Your soulmate may finally be able to admit that you mattered, that the memories mattered, that the places connected to you mattered. And perhaps they understand why their mood changed so quickly when they passed that location. They weren't reacting to bricks, buildings, streets, or scenery. They were reacting to an emotional history attached to those things. The location gave their mind a shortcut directly into a memory that had been quiet for a long time. And once they arrived there emotionally, they remembered something they had forgotten about themselves. Maybe they remembered how deeply they could care. Maybe they remembered how open they once were. Maybe they remembered how much they wanted to believe in the connection. Maybe they remembered a softer version of themselves that life had gradually covered with responsibilities, disappointments, and emotional defenses. And perhaps seeing that version again made them unexpectedly emotional. Because sometimes we don't only miss people from our past, we miss who we were when those people were part of our lives. Your soulmate may realize that this is partly why the encounter affected them. You became connected to a period of their life that they can never completely separate from who they are today. They may have grown, changed, and learned many things since then, but the person they were back then still exists somewhere inside their story. And you are part of that story. This doesn't necessarily mean they are going to suddenly appear at your door or send an emotional message. It doesn't mean the universe is guaranteeing that the two of you will reunite. The deeper meaning is much more human than that. They have been reminded of something real. They have been reminded that emotional significance doesn't always disappear simply because circumstances change. They have been reminded that some people leave behind memories that become part of the emotional landscape of our lives. And perhaps now they will carry that awareness differently. They may hear your name someday and notice the same quiet reaction. They may pass another familiar location and smile. They may remember something you said and finally understand what you meant. They may see an old photograph and feel gratitude rather than pain. The memory may no longer be something they need to avoid. It may become something they can hold peacefully, and that could be the real transformation this unexpected encounter creates. Instead of being haunted by what happened, they may finally be able to appreciate it. Instead of wondering why they still remember you, they may accept that remembering you is simply part of their history. Instead of feeling ashamed that a place changed their mood, they may recognize that the reaction was proof that they experienced something meaningful enough to leave an imprint. And perhaps somewhere in the middle of all these thoughts, they may wonder about you one final time. They may wonder whether you have changed, whether you are happy, whether you ever think about that place, whether some random location in your world could still remind you of them. They may wonder if you remember the same moments or if your memories have slowly faded into something completely different. They won't know the answer unless life somehow gives them the opportunity to ask. And perhaps that uncertainty is okay, because not every unanswered question needs an immediate answer. Sometimes simply realizing that the question still exists tells you something about your heart. Their question may be less about whether you will return and more about whether the connection meant as much to you as it did to them. And perhaps that is what they will carry with them after this encounter. Not a certainty, but a realization. They may realize that they have been able to move forward without completely moving beyond the emotional meaning of what happened between you. They may realize that the past can be finished without becoming meaningless. They may realize that someone can be absent from your life while still being present in certain memories. And perhaps they will never look at that place exactly the same way again. What was once simply a location has become a reminder of a chapter that shaped them, a chapter that included you, a chapter they may have thought was completely closed until one ordinary day unexpectedly opened the door again. And maybe the most beautiful part is that the memory doesn't have to become a wound. It can become a quiet reminder of growth, a reminder that they loved, they learned, they lost, and they continued. A reminder that life changes people, but meaningful connections can remain part of the foundation beneath that change. So if your soulmate really did experience this unexpected moment recently, perhaps what changed their mood wasn't simply the memory of you. Perhaps it was the realization of how much time has passed and how much has changed since the two of you shared that chapter. They may have looked around that familiar place and suddenly understood that they are standing in the same physical world, but carrying an entirely different life. And for one brief moment, the past and present touched each other. They remembered you, not because they were searching for you, but because something in that place still knew how to lead them back to the memory. They may have walked away afterward, but they didn't walk away exactly the same. They carried the realization with them. Maybe they smiled at one memory. Maybe they felt a quiet ache over another. Maybe they wondered what could have been. Maybe they simply whispered an unspoken thank you to the past. Whatever their reaction was, one thing became clear. Some memories don't need to be visited every day to remain meaningful. Sometimes they wait quietly until life brings you back to the right place. And when that happens, you suddenly understand that the person you thought you had completely left behind was never completely absent from your emotional story. They were simply waiting in a memory you hadn't opened for a long time. And perhaps that is exactly what happened to your soulmate. They thought they were only passing through a familiar place. But for a few unexpected moments, they were also passing through a part of their heart that still remembered you.